Thank you everyone for being with us today. So shall we start, Shreya, or we still have a couple of minutes?
Pramod was wanting us to wait for 2 more minutes. Pramod, tell us.
Yes, Pramod.
Maybe 2-3 minutes, ma'am. People are joining, so we can wait for 2-3 minutes.
Okay.
We have a very special connection with Dr. Pramod Jaiswal, who is one of us. We were colleagues in the IDSA some years ago. Radha, Pramod, and I. So very happy to see that Nepal Institute of Cooperation and Engagement has come up so well. And many congratulations. I attended one of your seminars in which you had gathered some galaxy of people from around the world, I must say.
Thank you, sir.
Actually, we are supposed to go to Nepal, but I don't think doctor wants us to go there.
We'll be happy to have you here, sir.
They will only welcome you once you finish all your existing connectivity projects. Professor Meena, namaskar. I think you are from National Defense University. That's what I gather. So it's 11:30 now. Am I audible?
Yes, sir. We can hear you fine.
So we can
Okay.
start now. People have joined.
Okay. So it's a great pleasure for us to welcome you all to this discussion on BIMSTEC Master Plan on connectivity. I'm particularly glad that VIF and NICE could come together to organize this discussion, which is going to be a focused discussion on a very specific issue pertaining to the BIMSTEC. So we hope that some recommendations will come out of this particular discussion. And so I want to thank Dr. Jaiswal for partnering with the VIF for organizing this seminar. And of course, Dr. Shirada Datta has been in touch with she has also been for the last several years working on connectivity issues. She has written a book on the Northeast, which is also connectivity. In fact, all our bilateral relationships now revolve around either bilateral connectivity or regional connectivity. These have become the most important issues in our bilateral relations. And it has to be so because South Asia, as you all know, it's been not observed, commented upon that it's the least integrated region in the world. And in fact, it used to be the most integrated region in the world before the partition of India in 1947, which partitioned India both on the east and the west and broke all the connectivity, natural connectivity as understood in the widest possible sense. So we have to now recoup that connectivity. And now we have Bay of Bengal has emerged as an important region. It used to be actually the Bay of Bengal connected the people of the region for centuries. And there was a seamless connectivity those days. People would travel easily. People from all over India would go to Myanmar and work there. And the trade and investment was very common. Roads were also, there are old routes which are probably we are trying to reconstruct. Anyhow, that was old story. That's an old story. But what do we do in the 21st century? And now with the BIMSTEC Charter having been adopted, and in 2018 in the Kathmandu summit, fourth summit of BIMSTEC, they talked about connectivity, and that as a result of those deliberations, the master plan for connectivity in the BIMSTEC region has now been adopted. The fifth summit, which was held in Colombo in March, April this year. So this is a step forward. It helps focus our discussions on the connectivity issues. There is, of course, it's a very fairly large and big document that has been brought out, and ADB has helped in studies on these connectivity issues, and I think ADB's support for realizing this master plan will be very important. So we'll hear more from the ADB expert. But as we look at the plan, there are a large number of projects. There are some which are ongoing projects, some projects which are considered new projects, flagship projects, signature projects. All these categorizations are there. And some numbers have also been mentioned as to what would be the funding and financing requirements. That is the most important aspect of realization and implementation. And the plan also divides into various kinds of various headings. There are road and road transport, railway and railway transport, likewise air, inland waters, and some facilitation and resource building and so on. So there are various categories, but you could see that from the breakup, I think roads itself takes more than 50% of the requirements, which are projected to be around, I think, close to $47 billion or so. So it's a huge area, and how do we go about realizing this is going to be a major challenge. And let us also note that the connectivity plan is a 10-year plan spanning 2018 to 2028, of which 4 years have already gone, and only 6 years are left. How to realize connectivity at such a big scale in 6 years when there is uncertainty, international situation is not very good, and there are headwinds in global economy, and some of the member countries are facing some economic distress as well. COVID and the geopolitical tensions have now boiled over. So how do we plan how do we implement this plan? One could be that should the plan be, this is my personal view, should the plan be pruned and only focused on a handful of high impact projects rather than we frittering our energy on 150 to 100 I don't know, some 250 various estimates I've seen number of projects. Also, what should be the mechanisms by which we should we can energize this implementation? Our own experience, of course, India has done a lot in the last few years in building connectivity with Bangladesh, with Nepal, with Bhutan, Sri Lanka, Myanmar, etc. But our own experience shows that there are many challenges. One is that these implementations and executions require high-level political will all the time, give political attention all the time. That is one. The second is that the felicitation mechanisms also have to be strong. We get stuck on policy issues. Since everybody has to be on board, it becomes difficult to build consensus quickly. So I think all member countries will have to speed up their decision-making processes and so on. And one example, for instance, I can mention is that is not to do with the BIMSTEC, but BIMSTEC, some of the member countries, like BBIN, for instance, where we still have some issues and everything is in place, but not all countries are still on board on vehicle act. Then we have also some unexpected events that happen. For instance, the political situation in Myanmar, which is uncertainties of this nature, also create issues for implementation. So our various projects in Myanmar are also making slow progress from multimodal transport, etc. We have been at it for a very long time. And trilateral highway also for many years we have been at it. I think there are some lessons which need to be learned from the project execution so that the BIMSTEC master plan does not suffer from those deficiencies. So I'll stop here and request you to give us your views as to how do we, identification has been done, prioritization, how to prioritize, how to raise funds and resources for this, how to involve the private sector, how to expedite policy decisions, and how to make good project reports based on feasibility studies, etc., so that there are no hitches. And of course, there is this huge connectivity, focus on connectivity internationally now, and particularly the experience of the BRI, which has led to debt traps and so on. I think BIMSTEC has to avoid that and make sure that the standards which are now being prescribed internationally for the construction of quality infrastructure and the international norms in which are now being prescribed to which need to be our infrastructure construction has to be in accordance with those norms. And you know, building infrastructure, but which creates economic distress for the countries is not the best way to go. And we have seen what is happening in Sri Lanka lately. So I think these are some of the with initial thoughts. I'll stop here and I'll request Dr. Sri Radha Datta to.
Thank you, sir. I just have a slide presentation more for because Pramod had mentioned that there would be some youngsters joining. So these are about 15 slides, but I'll just rush through them. And Pramod, as I mentioned, I'll share the slide PPT with you in case the youngsters want it. But I won't kind of mull over it in great details, but this is basically a summary of the report which Dr. Gupta has just mentioned, and how it's been. I think the fact that it's a great beginning that there's a plan in place, completely ADB supported plan, and they've identified the sectors and has gone into great details on that. And I think that's a very useful exercise. But let me just go through this and then I'll point out what are the other issues. Of course, has been the estimated cost that we are discussing. 47 billion for 141 projects that have been identified, and minus that the excluding is about 22. So it's a huge amount, and the plan, of course, and it's a plan work in progress, does not talk about how the funding is going to happen. And I think that's a core issue for all the BIMSTEC countries, but we'll probably come to that at another stage here. But I think the first step is, I think, a great step that they've been identified, and they've actually identified 16 principles, which I've just highlighted a few, not all. Basically, ensuring the rule of law, transparency, financial responsibility, and respect, sovereignty, equality, territorial integrity, which is, I think, a point that BIMSTEC Master Plan is making, as against all other individual, of course, the BRI here in question is, as against those plans, that this is something where everybody has a say. It's part of, equally joining the thing. Of course, at this point of time, we know, I think we'll get into those details later, but it's very clear that there was no reason for any apprehension. And this, of course, has been at the BIMSTEC level, various levels being discussed. And finally, this was presented in the summit, and I'm hoping that the next summit they'll probably adopt it, and we'll hear more from it from Preetam, who's really one of the architects, I think, of this plan that we are looking at. as of now, I think, there has been a lot of deliberations, but again, I'll, I mean, they're saying it's a live document. This is a particular word I picked up from because it's going to keep changing. I mean, just exactly what was said by Dr. Gupta, that, we'll have to zero down on which are the high impact. I mean, there are a whole lot of things thrown in, and I've not put everything, but I mean, road and road transport is one of the main sectors. I think 60% of the trade right now is through road. So this is something that is very key. But even having seen road sectors and having worked in the Northeast for a while, we've also, I mean, I'm completely of the opinion that within the BIMSTEC, especially we have 5 South Asian countries, we need to take our cargo away from the roads. And that's something, so the road should ideally be left to tourism and other issues, which is something, again, which is a very, very important circuit. And we are also, even within BIMSTEC plan, they're talking about the Buddhist and the temple circuit, which we are all aware of, that it exists actually. There are constant movement, but it hasn't been done through a group impact. There are people from Myanmar constantly coming in here, Thailand, Indians moving there. So there is, but it's not never been under the rubric of BIMSTEC in that sense. And I think it's possible that we cogently put that together. And once we have this system in place, maybe it'll be something that we'll be able to work on and look at it more closely. Of course, ports and maritime is, I think, again, one of the premier prime sectors. Most, again, because some of the countries like Nepal and Bhutan, who are Himalayan and they don't have access, but most of their trade is also taken through through the maritime transport. And I think large cargo movement has been always through maritime, and I think we need to work a lot more on that, and we'll probably hear that. Inland water transport, I think, other than Bangladesh, within the BIMSTEC countries, this has not been utilized well. In fact, just before this meeting started, Pritam was telling us about, discussing with me about another project that he's doing on improving the inland water system within India. And I think while discussing India, Bangladesh, inland water systems again has been a very core issue, but we know that it functions far below its optimum levels. There are huge issues there in terms of viability. Again, at VIF, I remember we've discussed this once, and I think while this is an important sector, but a sector completely underutilized, and I'm not very positive about what it means in the immediate future. I don't see really much future for it. Railways and rail transport, again, has been talked about in some length within the project, but this again is a problem issue within BIMSTEC, also because that's also true for the roads, that your weightage, your systems are different. But this is something that we are trying right now. I think with Nepal, we are trying to build a railway system. So these all will come together and kind of form something. But again, there is a kind of access to port and all of that, because just one focus won't take it, won't be able to give us the kind of comprehensive trade that we are looking at within the region. So this is something that we are honest, but again, I think we'll talk about the limitations at the next stage. Of course, aviation and airport development, again, we know that for tourism, this is something which really has been the most effective one. And Thailand, of course, is far ahead of others in terms of how they manage the aviation system. Their airport is one of the, I think, the 4th busiest or 5th busiest in the world. So that's a different level altogether. India's, of course, system is catching up, but again, unfortunately, the rest of the other countries are way behind. They need to, of course, Bangladesh again is now building a second airport. Sri Lanka, of course, has now got issues, but that's something again is part of the system, part of the plan, and there has been some level of discussions and some progress has been made in the recent years, but again, much more needs to be done. All of this is only possible when it's actually a multimodal, intermodal transport system, because again, as I said, the terrain is different for other countries. So while the road can connect Nepal, India, Bhutan, Myanmar, Thailand, Sri Lanka is going to be out of it. So Sri Lanka comes in here when you have a multimodal system, which actually involves them and their movement also. Transport connectivity, makes sense only when there's trade. And I think a core part of this plan is also having, trade facilitation, which we also know at the bilateral level there has been issues within India, and of course South Asia is not a very how should I say shining example of trade facilitation. Uh, I think I have some statistics that later on where. Look, let me just go through. These are the identified as the critical success factors for it to be. Of course, political will is the foremost. If you're not on the same page, no matter what your potentials are, you'll never be able to get thing going. So that's something. But again, while there are issues in the between, especially Myanmar and Bangladesh, but we've seen so far as BIMSTEC is concerned, none of them have, hesitated in being part of the sub-regional organization. They've always been very forthcoming in participating and taking things forward. So that's something very, very positive about BIMSTEC, that despite whatever bilateral differences, they've not allowed that to come in ways of planning their, programs together. Uh, they've also identified a lot of other issues, including, of course, social and environment concerns. I think whether climate change and other social factors, environment factors, is something, again, a very, very important imperative. So whenever you're building anything of such large, quantum, these factors are becoming very important in today's world, and we've seen how that is a concern. In fact, I'll come back to BBN later. Bhutan constantly flags their environmental concerns as not being part of the sub-region. So that's something that we have to be. And of course, they talked about budget constraints. I think that is, really the main core idea. If you don't have budgets for any of this, nothing ever takes up. And of course, robust monitoring in South Asia, a lot of discussion, lot of plans, lot of projects. Even after the detailed project report is in place, we've seen how implementation continues to be a challenge. I remember some time ago, we had our High Commissioner of Maldives telling us that for the first time, India Maldives bilateral projects have been, completed within time. This is something new for us in South Asia. We've never been able to do that, even with Bangladesh or even with Nepal. Of course, the gas pipeline was a different example with Nepal, but I'm saying we are getting there slowly. But I think robust monitoring, again, is something a very, very core important factor in terms of ensuring that the transport plan is becoming. This is something, again, picked up completely from the ADB, and this is the 6 overall as to what is. I mean, this actually explains the entire plan, and I think that is how they've been able to kind of put this together. And I've got a map here, which is again not part of the ADB. This is something that I could see, and this is what it would look like. I mean, a lot of it, in fact, exists in terms of the sea route, of course, exists. There's a lot of bit of the road connection. There's these inland water system which is in place between India and Bangladesh. Multimodal terminals are, I think, 5 or 3 have been identified, which is, I think, the most important factor, because without the multimodal terminals, none of this will be effective. And of course, land custom stations and seaport. Again, from experience, we've seen that land custom stations are in place, but they're not efficient, especially in the India Northeast sector. We've seen that. So, I mean, those are just having them is not enough. Ensuring that the utility and efficiency, I think, is more important. For long, we've actually just picked the boxes saying that, okay, we build this. It's like these 22 airports that we have in the Northeast, only 11 actually are functional. So, these are the issues when we are discussing transport project plans, that a lot of the ones which are flagging off that, okay, we need to do this, we need to do that. But how do you make them efficient, utilize them optimally? Let me just look at this and come back to the question that Dr. Gupta was asking. I mean, I think none of us have any hesitation in saying that BIMSTEC is not one of the most efficient sub-regional organizations today. 1.6 billion, which amounts to 22% of the world's population, but only 4% of the global GDP. At this present moment, we've seen 2 members going through severe crisis. Their ability to be part of these projects right now, I think for the next year or so or more, in fact, would be very, very inhibited. So I think, again, a point that Dr. Gupta made, that we'll have to go the sub-region route, which of course is an effective route, but to think that BIMSTEC altogether is coming along, it's not. In fact, even at the BIN, we know that Bangladesh, India, Nepal, we signed the MOU with Bhutan in 2015. It is only now that the agreement's been signed, and I'm not even sure whether we've actually, I think Pritam will tell us about it, whether we've actually been able to finally use this, the BIN. I don't know if the BIN doesn't sound too nice when you say it, but so 3 members belong to BIMSTEC. So I think this is a sub-region that we could begin. And this will then develop into the larger Commonwealth. I think that's how we have to, and I think that's, I'm sure every member country is looking at it like that. Again, as I said, right now, MVA covers only the road. There was a lot of confusion over whether it's cargo and passengers. Now it's just cargo, I think. And of course, as I said, Sri Lanka has to be included. If it has to be included, there has to be a multimodal connectivity, which is going to be in place. So again, to open up this cobweb from the sub-region to the bigger sub-region, there has to be far more greater, planning in how we do that. There has been internal initiatives which have been very, very, I think, commendable. I mean, the fact that India, Bangladesh, again, Nepal, the India, Myanmar, Thailand, again, there's been great progress. But we've seen again, and this is when I come to this point about problem existing, whether it's on the road, whether it's rail, whether it's inland, the hard infrastructure and the soft infrastructure does not go hand in hand. And I think I recall many years of being working on connectivity straight from IDSA days in 2010, when I think I took the first tour of Northeast, identifying these land custom stations and bilateral projects. Even then, that problem, everybody who works in this, and I'm sure Pritam will talk about this more, but it's something that continues to exist despite constant references to it, that why are the systems not being developed well. So a lot of land custom stations, for example, and I know I've said this before, Agartala, it's very well built, fabulous, but there's absolutely no trade on that sector. The land custom station on the Bangladesh Petropol Vinapur side has just improved recently. There's still a lot of problems, but it continues to carry the weight of the cargo load. So obviously there's a issue in terms of the momentum, trade momentum here. So even if we build great infrastructure, it doesn't necessarily mean that you'll be able to push your cargo that way. Yesterday we were at VIF discussing another project that is in Eurasia, the India, the thing, and how, despite paperwork being done, we're talking about it, it's still not carrying the cargo we had said that it would. I mean, despite the, expectations, or despite whatever studies that were being. Similarly here, as of now, within BIMSTEC, we see that the interregional trade is seaborne, which obviously that the maritime connectivity is something we need to focus on. I think, as I said even earlier, that for me, I think road and of course railway is one of the most, moderately priced always, but road really in a developed world should be left for a passenger movement. Because again, I'm sure there's somewhere where I'm talking about FDIs. The largest FDI within BIMSTEC is actually on tourism again. And as I said, I think a large chunk, and I haven't had the details, but I know that Thailand again is a clear winner there, that they're able to maximize that much more. And again, we haven't been able to, tap the potential. And I think I'm repeating a number here, but I think the 2019 statistics for FDI within BIMSTEC was about 14 billion or something like that. How far figure somewhere, which is really, really low compared to what it has in terms of potential. But again, the point is that we keep discussing potential, but for ad nauseum for years and decades, but it doesn't get translated because obviously there's some other issues on the ground. These are, of course, institutional efficacy, infrastructure deficit, administrative efficiency. I'm not sure whether I missed out, but I don't see the plan talking about banking facilities. In fact, another point that I'm talking about, land custom stations don't function well because it's not supported by efficient banking systems, which is what is in Mori Damu border. the SBI branch there is not able to actually, it's functions like ATM really. It doesn't support the cross-border trade. Then what is it the problem? For example, right now, this was in 2012 or 2014, India signed BIPA with Bangladesh, where they were, this was investment agreement. But even today, as we speak, Bangladesh money is not accepted through the banking system. So the only company which is invested in India, which is Pran Group, they have an office in Singapore. So it is Singapore which is funding the project. While officially we are supposed to be allowed, I mean the government has, but the banking system hasn't changed. They are still going with the old circulars or whatever, and somehow there's obviously a disconnect, because all this has to work. As I'm saying, the hard infrastructure, soft infrastructure has to go side by side, and unfortunately, so in South Asia, that's not really the case. I'm sorry about the sensitivities of the vegan public here, but I'm just saying that, the point here is, again, that's been my argument about connectivity always, is that when there is a momentum for trade, your infrastructure is irrelevant. Trade will pass, trade will move. While, BIMSTEC, and I sincerely believe that BIMSTEC is now a vehicle of strategic ambition. For all the core members. But how does one translate that into a core success? I mean, right now, I know India is pushing for it, but your 6 other members all to have to also push for it. And sitting in Delhi, I think I'm at a loss as to, I mean, I clearly know why Sri Lanka can't push for it just now. I clearly know why Myanmar can't push for it. But Nepal, Bhutan, I don't see, right, as I said, they're all on the same page with us when we are discussing BIMSTEC issues, but I don't see any individual effort from any other members. I'm sorry to say this, but I don't see it. It is always India who's pushing it. And, so my point is that we've got this grandiose plan, and I'm saying we need a plan. Without a plan, you can't go anywhere. At least you can critique a plan. If there's no plan, what do you talk about? But all of this is important to get your trade going. Now, how do we get trade going here? FTA. Again, we know that India and Thailand are the 2 larger economies here, and there has been interest in India too. But discussions have been on for so long. It's not new that we're discussing FTA. Without an FTA, of course, India has asked, India and Thailand both have talked about, I'm terrible at PPT, so I'm not sure whether I actually added. In terms of, about cross-border production links among the member countries and generating new value chains. Again, when as working on RVCs and global value chains, we've seen that the first basic anything of building global value chains or regional value chains is data. Other than India or Thailand, UNCTAD has zero data about the rest of the country. So how are we ever going to build that? If we are not able to build trade value chains, why would you need infrastructure for? So I'm just saying that, both ways we do need, because many of us constantly learn that without infrastructure, you can't maximize your trade potential. But when there is infrastructure in place, and I've seen this on India, with some of our neighbors, despite infrastructure being in place, they haven't been utilized because that momentum of trade does not exist at the particular corner of the world. So all of this, discussing a BIMSTEC master plan of connectivity without pushing the FTA, without ensuring, and again, something that I've said this, and I guess there's nobody from the BIMSTEC Secretariat here. I've said this many times and saying it again. The BIMSTEC Secretariat has to own up in terms of giving us data. Where would we go if we needed something? And we've actually, because we are also a bilateral think tank partner for BIMSTEC, we've said that even VIF can support that. We've said that recently when Thailand hosted us on a BIMSTEC 1.5 dialogue recently, last month, that some of us have absolutely, we have no way to go back because again, some of the banking data is illegible for many of us. So at this point of time, it has to be something which has to work together. So just having infrastructure plan in place is not going to really, work. Yes, I think there is a very upbeat mood, especially in India, there's an upbeat mood. But whatever I've seen of the last 20 years of BIMSTEC, it doesn't justify any of this. And I say this because in India, in Delhi and everywhere else, I think we are all very, charged. But if I go to Nepal, if I go to Bangladesh, if I go to Sri Lanka, even today they only talk about SARC. For them, the regional experience is all about SARC. Only because, and I hope Pramod will discuss this a little more when he speaks, for them, because I feel BIMSTEC, they feel hasn't delivered. So for them, any regional experience that they want to focus on, and I've been on regional platforms in all these South Asian countries, BIMSTEC is really a marginal idea for them. That's also because I think we've not been able to deliver. So, you know, I'm just saying that let me close here by saying that, of course, a master plan is important. Thinking big is important. Without that, we can't go. But again, it has to be small incremental steps, and that's how I see BIMSTEC unfolding. As I said, from 2015 to 2022, we couldn't get a simple road transport movement between India, Nepal, and Bangladesh. Three good friends. How are we going to do that for 7 not so great friends? But I think it's a beginning, and I'm waiting to hear all of you. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you, Shraddha, for those remarks. I think there are issues, but probably there is a realization in every country that if you miss the bus now, you missed it for a very long time or forever. I mean, if you look at the debate in international politics today, they're saying the next 10 years are going to be make or break for the world. If you don't, get our act together now, it won't happen. So I think there's no point going on the going to the past, etc. What happened? Because if it is useful, do it. So I think prioritization is all BIMSTEC countries probably do want to implement, and they are on board. But they should, of course, push for these projects. And I think incrementality is very important. It's very important to set some good examples. And I'm glad that between India, Nepal, and India, Bhutan, India, Bangladesh, India, Sri Lanka, at least at the individual level, something is being done. So let me now request next is Dr. Preetam Banerjee, who is the logistics sector specialist at the ADB. Banerjee.
Thank you very much. I think I have a presentation as well, and while it's being uploaded, let me make a few caveats. First, ADB is not, in that sense, an architect of the master plan. It's really the work of the national member governments who have identified the list of projects in consultation. ADB provided the support for that. To quickly, respond to what would be the prioritization. The prioritization is actually dependent on the member states, and there a lot of it will be driven by the national priorities. So in some cases, we will be, of course, have to be mindful of the fact that what might be a national priority for India in terms of the infrastructure India would want Bangladesh or Nepal to build might not be, matching with what Nepal or Bangladesh thinks is the important priority for them. The master plan is basically a laundry list. It does some, indicative prioritization, but which project to implement at what pace will, of course, depend purely on the national governments. The funding modalities also would depend on how the national governments want to proceed. All options are open to them: sovereign financing, multilateral development banks, bilateral financing. All of those options are open to them. But before I proceed, first I'd like to thank VIF very much for giving me the opportunity to come and share my thoughts, and also put on record that I would not, what I am saying is not ADB's official point of view. I mean, I like to speak openly from my own perspective as logistics specialist in this case. Sridhar spoke about many issues, all of which I have very, I have been working on them for a very long time, and I have some very passionate views on them myself. And I think the paucity of time, I'm mindful that we're running behind schedule. I will not want to get into the details. All of, I'll just touch upon them very briefly before I go on to my main presentation. What I would like to do in my main presentation is essentially underline this particular linkage between the BIMSTEC master plan and how the national plans of each of these member states are important. And in that context, bring in the Prime Minister's Gati Shakti master plan, which has just been launched in India. And the reason why I would like to do that is that if you look at the geographic space BIMSTEC occupies, then India is a major transit country, especially for the BBIN region, and it's a continental sized geography. Its linkages, at least on the western part of BIMSTEC, will define the connectivity quality. So before I go into my presentation, couple of things that Sriradha touched upon. On the LCS, there is actually quite a lot of trade that happens at Akhauda. There were limitations in policy from Bangladesh side, which restricted the number of items that could be traded from there. That is being relooked. But we have to be always mindful that any land border, facility is basically a mirror. You can have fantastic infrastructure on one side of the border and not such great infrastructure on the other side. The throughput is defined by the quality on both sides. So a fantastic example is the Benapole-Petrapole border, where on the Petrapole side, a lot of investment has happened in the Indian side. It can handle 400 trucks plus per day. But if you look at the Benapole side of the border in Bangladesh, they're still limited by 150, which means the throughput is restricted. So you have these queues building up on the Indian side. So again, it brings back to the core idea of the BIMSTEC master plan, that how do you bring in different national governments to agree, because the transport is network. And if it's not all, the throughput is not fully thought through, whether it's the quality of the road end to end and other things, then there always are going to be operational challenges. Last, before 2 points before I move to my presentation on the MVA, I was even wearing my industry hat several years back. I was part of the advisory kind of group. When I was in DHL, we ran the first pilots on the cargo as well, and I was responsible for those pilots. The challenge is that from the very beginning, I had informally in those consultations, I'd always said keep it restricted to two kinds of movement. What we call scheduled passenger services, which is basically these buses that go right, on a schedule. It's a bus in like Dhaka, Kolkata, and all of that, which is less controversial. And of course, cargo. And cargo can be limited to specific routes that the governments identify, keeping in mind these, sensitivities about environment and things like that. But what was also included was this concept of non-scheduled passenger services, which means basically taxis, buses on rent, etc. Now, if you look at, it will immediately raise concerns, and we have, colleagues from Nepal over here as well who can, perhaps also validate this. That a lot of the tourist movement from India, if the original, if the Indian tourists are using Indian taxi services or buses which can move into that country, it has a huge impact on livelihoods in Nepal. And same was true for Bhutan. So obviously these interest groups were extremely bothered, and there was pushback. There was pushback on some of the cargo. I'll not go into the details of those in specific vested interest in every country. So these things, the political economy has to be thought through before you design an agreement, and I think we were not fully ready for that. I'm hoping that now, it will move forward faster. On the trade aspect, very quickly, I think FTAs, we need to really, have, maybe a proper consultation, in a place like VIF, whether or not you actually need a BIMSTEC FTA. Because if you look, all of these countries have some amount of agreements with each other. With Bangladesh, for example, there's zero duty access to the Indian market. We have the India-ASEAN FTA, with, which applies to Myanmar and Thailand. So there are, this whole spaghetti ball of agreements. To what extent a new FTA adds value is something that we need to think through. I think the main challenge there is how do you connect specific value chains. One specific one that, for example, has been working very well under the radar is that Bangladeshi ready-made garments industry is very much dependent on Indian yarn and fabric, and it works very well. So, are there specific value chains that could be supported through incentive schemes and investment schemes? And that discussion needs to happen in detail. Now, with those few words, I'll move on to my main presentation. It's very focused on the operational aspect from a logistics perspective, on how the BIMSTEC, the projects identified in the BIMSTEC, of course, driven by national priorities, is actually integral to the national plans of each country. Mr. Pointer, we have come here. Oh no, I have to go back. Okay, so if you can see why this table is interesting, because the point it makes is that if you look at the objectives outlined in the Prime Minister's Gati Shakti Master Plan, and the BIMSTEC master plan is a lot of commonality, right? And that is the underlying point. Both look at how to have multi-sectoral approach to connectivity. Both have a lot of focus on intermodal infrastructure. So in order to facilitate better use of different modes and not have over dependence on road, as Sridhar was mentioning. Both have a lot of focus on last mile to key gateways, and gateways are basically ports. They're seaports, airports, and land ports. Where there's a slight difference, because one is a national plan, one is a regional plan, is that while the Prime Minister's Gati Shakti is focusing on the arterial transport infrastructure that is specific to India's economic corridors, and we have a number of economic corridors identified nationally, the focus in the BIMSTEC master plan is of arterial transport infrastructure, which is a BIMSTEC interest, in the sense that if there are existing BIMSTEC uh, transport corridors which are trading a lot between these countries, that is the focus for the BIMSTEC master plan. In the Prime Minister's Gati Shakti, the focus is on the coordination of infrastructure between our national 9 ministries. So we have 4 transport ministries, and of course the Indian states, because states also in our federal system have a role to play in infrastructure development. In the case of BIMSTEC, it is the coordination between the member states of the BIMSTEC. The two critical kind of somewhat differentiation that exists in the BIMSTEC master plan, that it is a much greater focus on border infrastructure, which PM Gati Shakti does not have. And it has this focus on trade facilitation, which includes transport facilitation, which is defined by an agreement like the motor vehicles agreement, but also on the customs and other facilitation that you require for trade to happen. So what I'll try and do when I move to the next slide is use this illustrative example of the overlap between the BIMSTEC master plan and the Prime Minister's Gati Shakti in this case. And the Prime Minister's Gati Shakti in that sense is a game changer, because no other country, the best of my knowledge in the BIMSTEC region, has come up with such a comprehensive program for connectivity long term, looking at all different modes of transport and also an economic corridor perspective. So, and I'm sorry if the slide looks slightly complicated, but if you look at on your left hand side of the slide, it looks at this is India, right? And it looks at an industrial corridor that exists. There's a road, a rail, and an inland water that is connecting it to a economic hub or a gateway. And this is essentially, let's say, the example of Kolkata. The economic hub or gateway, you can think of it as Kolkata. The industrial clusters would be the clusters that you have in Asansol, Durgapur, and in Jharkhand. And you have these multimodal connectivity of rail, road, and inland waterway. The red, yellow, and green dots that you see are essentially intermodal facilities that have already been planned, and some of them are in execution. The yellow one, for example, is an extended port gate that is being considered on the left bank of the Hooghly. And the green dot is your Kolkata port itself. The red dot would be the Sahibganj multimodal terminal that is there in the National Waterway one on the Ganges. So this connectivity and this improvement and all the investment that needs to go into it is a part of the Prime Minister's Gati Shakti master plan. The railway connectivity is integral to the Eastern dedicated freight corridor, for example. Apart from that, the Prime Minister's Gati Shakti master plan will also focus on the last mile connectivity to the land border. Land border in question in this case would be the Benapole-Petrapole land border. And there's also the Darshana-Gede border, which is the railway border. So both rail and road. So as you can see that, by focusing on all of this infrastructure, it actually is a force multiplier for BIMSTEC connectivity itself, because this is integral part of the end-to-end connectivity. Now, once we go to the other side of the border, in this case Bangladesh, there is as a part of the BIMSTEC master plan, focus on the connection between the land border in Benapole-Petrapole to Dhaka, which is the main economic cluster. Now, as all of you must have been following in the news, a big development in Bangladesh is the Padma Multi, the road and rail bridge, which is really a game changer for connectivity. So, interestingly, the Padma Bridge was a national priority as well, because those of you are aware of Bangladesh's geography, the southwestern part of the country was very poorly connected with Dhaka, which is the defining economic cluster for Bangladesh. because of the river, you couldn't, cross. You had to use ferries. The river that could, the rail and road bridge that could do the Bangabandhu bridge was further north. So you had to take a detour and come to this part. So the other problem was that you could not run a full load container train on Bangabandhu bridge. It did not have the load bearing capacity. So what it does is not only does it, and there is associated with the Padma Bridge is a Padma Bridge rail connectivity project, which will provide direct connectivity between Dhaka and Khulna and other parts of southwest Bangladesh. So while it's a national priority and they have achieved this objective, what it also does is that it allows direct connectivity between Benapole and Petrapole, and to that extent Kolkata, through a much shorter route through rail and road across this Padma Bridge to Dhaka. And there is, as a red dot over there shows, a planned multi-modal terminal that is planned at that end of the bridge as well. So there's there's a combination of national infrastructure plans, and then there is the the connectivity. So it's a throughput. So once the essential point that is I'm trying to make here is that sound implementation of national priorities and tweaking that connectivity with the regional one will achieve the end-to-end. That is what the BIMSTEC is also trying to do. It is not some top-down plan. It has to be a bottom-up where countries realize that this is what I need to do nationally, and then there's linkages in between. So I'm going to use and keeping the previous kind of the West Bengal, Jharkhand, Bihar, and then Bangladesh connectivity. I'm going to use some of illustrative examples, and I apologize for the somewhat hazy quality of the maps. To give you three, and transport and logistics is essentially about, specific corridors that you create. They can be multimodal or single mode. So first one is, what I'm talking about is the Bangladesh westbound ready-made garments via the JNPT port. Now, when you looked at my last graph, this must not have been the first thing that came to your mind. But let me explain what I mean by this. If you are a ready-made garments exporter, you have two options. You can use Chittagong port, which is highly congested and increasingly expensive. And even if you use Chittagong port, your container will first travel from Chittagong to the transshipment hub of Colombo and then catch a connecting ship to Rotterdam or Antwerp or wherever else in Western Europe it needs to go. JNPT, if you use JNPT and you can travel by road or rail from Dhaka, bring your container to JNPT, load onto a ship, you get a direct connection to Rotterdam or Antwerp. You save on time and you save on cost, which increases the competitiveness of the RMG exports from Bangladesh. So an improved connectivity between Dhaka and Kolkata not only is important for the connectivity between these two countries, but is extremely important for Bangladesh's connectivity with the rest of the Western world and its own competitiveness. So that is what transport networks do. So when we looked at that railway route, which is going to become operational, hopefully with the Padma Bridge, Bangladeshi cargo can travel by rail all the way up to JNPT via Kolkata, and then use the maritime connectivity from there. So that's one example. The other, I'm mindful that there are Nepali colleagues today, which is being considerably being seriously thought about, is how do you move bulk and oversized cargo, especially infrastructure development cargo, which is very difficult to move, of course, by road, even in some cases by rail, and water is the best way to move it, and you want to minimize your land transit. So there is a discussion between Nepal and India to allow Nepal cargo to use Sahibganj, inland water terminal, which is very close to the Nepalese border. And once you load in the inland water system in NW1 in India, from Sahibganj it can come directly to this multimodal extended port gate I was mentioning as being developed, and then be loaded onto a ship. And it's both ways. So, for example, if Nepal for its infrastructure requirements is importing oversized large infrastructure goods from parts of Southeast Asia or East Asia, it can also be that they bring it from Singapore via ship all the way up to Sahibganj using a barge, minimizing the need for road movement or rail movement, and then do the last mile by rail or road, as the case might be. So that would really help Nepal to that extent, having this connection. The last one is thinking of again this value chain I was mentioning of ready-made garments. And also India's own need to connect Northeast, specifically the part of Northeast. So Northeast, when people talk about connectivity, it's very important to point out that Northeast actually had two specific economic subregions. One is your Brahmaputra Valley, with roughly Guwahati being the epicenter of it. The other, for the lack of a better word, is what I would call the extended Borak Valley ecosystem, which is Silchar and that the protruding triangle of Assam, and then the border it shares with the states of Tripura, Manipur, and Mizoram. And that really, in terms of their connectivity needs, they're different. Because if I'm coming from North India or West India, it is very easy. This chicken neck problem is not a problem for the Brahmaputra Valley if I'm coming from Western India or North India. It's a direct route. Only if I'm coming from Southern India, then the whole of Northeast, I am really going a roundabout route. And if I'm going anywhere to the Borak Valley ecosystem, I'm taking a roundabout route. So now, again, coming back to my specific third example, if I am an RMG producer in Dhaka, I need to do a lot of intermediate inputs, a lot of which will come from the Tamil Nadu industrial clusters. Now, this whole direct rail connectivity that is being provided through the Padma Bridge allows Dhaka to access this much easier at a lesser cost. But it also allows goods to move much more easily to my Tripura border in the eastern part of Bangladesh. And this is where the economies of scale come into play. And this is to Sridhar's point of, not seeing enough goods, the chicken and the egg problem. The chicken and the egg problem typically are solved when you create networks that allow you to build economies of scale, right? It is not, that network cannot just serve the needs of the bilateral trade. So think about it, the whole ecosystem of Padma Bridge then and the further connectivity we have just discussed, especially with the first and the third examples in this slide, it allows Bangladesh to use that infrastructure for its third country exposed to the Western world. It allows India to use that infrastructure to get better connectivity to the Northeast, specifically to the Borak Valley. And it allows better bilateral trade between India and Bangladesh, especially from the south and eastern parts. So this network that you have created is multi-use, and when it becomes multi-use, all of these different cargoes are into the play, into the services play. So now I can run regular services and it becomes operational. So these are the kind of the building blocks of any connectivity project, right? So you plan the infrastructure, you also put in place the policies which allow you to do all of these different kinds of cargo. If my policy are restricting, for example, to move Bangladeshi cargo using an Indian port, or the customs regulations are not facilitative of that, all of these things will then impede developing the economies of scale using that network. So that is why as Sridhar was very correct in pointing out, the policy part of it is as important as the hard infrastructure part of it. Otherwise, the networks will not get developed. So, I want to thank you for your time. And before I end, I'll just like to make one brief point, especially when it comes to, and this is not just in respect of BIMSTEC. I think the big challenge that we have in terms of connectivity in this, particularly the BBI and sub-region, I don't, the whole Pakistan-Afghanistan bit is a different ball game altogether. But in this case, there is a significant amount of trade that is happening. It's not the trade volumes are not small, especially if you look at the India-Bangladesh, bilateral trade network. So there is demand. The question is, how do we facilitate that demand in a proper transport network planning? Right? That is something that is work in progress. If you even think of Nepal, Nepal is completely dependent on connectivity through India. First of all, Nepal is dependent. The trade between India and Nepal, or the consumer goods that Nepalese consumers use, actually come from India. So it's a small economy. So volumes relative will always be small, but it's a significant amount of Nepal's trade is connected to India, both in terms of the bilateral trade, but also the transit. It happens through, ports in India, Vizag, Kolkata, and JNPT. But it's thinking out of the box that is really, has always been a problem. We always, look at these projects in buckets. So just to finish with one another illustrative example, and I'm using this example, and I'm sorry for I'm mindful of the time, but it's important because it's the interplay of policy and also addressing the and and this is a closed group, so I can say this openly, handling the vested interests that come into play, right? So what is this example? One of the earliest beneficiaries, potential beneficiaries of the BBI and motor vehicles agreement would have actually been the high-end fashion ready-made garments that come out of Dhaka, right? So Dhaka has both the more Thanksgiving $10 shirts as well as the more expensive kind of $50, $60 kind of pieces of garments. Now these more expensive ones, nobody wants to hold inventory, so they're executed closer to the time of sales. They typically move by air, not by sea. Now Dhaka airport for several decades now have is performing, is underperforming. There are issues of finding connectivity, the cost of using air evacuation from Dhaka to the markets in Europe. So the large RMG players, most of whom are European, producers themselves, have often wanted to look at the alternative to use Kolkata airport, because Kolkata airport air cargo is underutilized, so it's a lot of space is there. There's no problem of congestion, and there are flights which are cheaper. But that would mean if they had to fly the cargo for the very short distance between Kolkata and Dhaka and then fly out again, that will be a inexpensive proposition. So what happens typically in a place like Europe, right? Austrian or French wine exports from the Lorraine region, they don't use Paris. The closer airport is Cologne. They cross the border, use Cologne airport. And it would make sense for Dhaka to use Kolkata airport. So it's not possible. Why? Because if I use the land board, if I truck it from Dhaka to Kolkata, the BVI and motor vehicles agreement is not in place. So I have to transship and use two different trucks. The customs regulations currently don't allow me what we call inland clearances, which means I cleared the goods in Dhaka, nothing happens at the border. They just check for the validity of the seal, and it comes directly to the Kolkata airport, and I fly out. All of these things are not in place. So because of all of these things are not in place, this is not happening. When attempts were made to put some solutions to be found, there was and this is where the vested interest thing comes into play. There was huge pushback in Dhaka. If you do, I'm Bengali myself, so I can I could read it in the local language, and I was in industry that time when I was trying to push this solution. The narrative there in newspapers was that this is an attempt by Indian players to take away the business from Dhaka airport, to take away the business away from Bangladeshi freight forward, which is completely untrue. The Bangladeshi freight company could have provided this service as well. But there are local, vested interests which derive, let's say, incremental pricing and more money because of the condition in Dhaka airport. See, when you have a problem, you always need agents to solve the problem. So there are people who don't want the problem to go away. And these vested interests had enough of, let's say, clout in the media and elsewhere to put such negativity around this solution that in the end the government's backed off, saying no, maybe we need to take a relook. So these, so for every single of these networks that you will try to create, it will be important to understand what interest groups are at play to ensure that narrative is built in advance. And last point, this Sriradhaji and Sony sir and all BIF colleagues, is that institutions like yours play a critical role in that. Mapping these interest groups, mapping these challenges, and having that narrative in advance. So, which when we actually go to the the nuts and bolts operationalization of these networks, we have dealt with all of that. We have never done this. We have kind of mindlessly gone like a bull in a china shop, and this is the solution. Then all the noise started. Everybody got scared, and then they backed off. This, this 2 steps forward, 1 step back is why I think we are still lagging behind. And it will be great to see platforms like this play this kind of proactive role in solving these problems. Thank you so much for your time, and thanks for having me.
Thank you very much for that fascinating presentation, very informative, and also a lot of insights from your personal experience, both of working in the industry and as a logistic specialist. I think you have rightly pointed out that building a master plan is one thing, which is essentially a collation of projects which somebody somewhere prepares. To have an organic list would require many other things, the interface with policy, and very important that you mentioned how the national plans and regional plans should also talk to each other. And of course, the role of the vested interest. which can make or break a plan. So I think these issues can be sorted out only through much larger and bigger engagements at various levels. And while making these plans, master plans, industry and the the local interests, etc., should also be included. So I think one way could be that there could be uh, such focused discussions on this master plan in different countries, and like we are having one here. Maybe the same thing can be done in Nepal. Same thing can be done in Bangladesh and other countries, and let each one come out with what they think of this master plan. And since this master plan is a live document, as Shriata said, so perhaps something can be added, subtracted to make it more organic. Right now, is it organic? I do not know. Thank you for that presentation. And now I request Dr. Pramod Jaiswal to make his remarks. We are running behind time, so I request you to be kindly, all of the remaining speakers to be kindly bear with the time constraint and be brief. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning and namaste to Chair, fellow participants and panelists. At the outset, I must thank Vivekanand International Foundation for this joint BIMSTEC dialogue on BIMSTEC Master Plan for Transport Connectivity, jointly organized with Nepal Institute for International Cooperation and Engagement. I, on behalf of NICE, would like to thank VIF, especially Dr. Arvind Gupta and Dr. Datta for their support. We wish to have this discussion in series and would be glad to have support of VIF for the same. Dr. Gupta rightly pointed out that this kind of discussions should be in different member countries of BIMSTEC, and would be happy to maybe start virtually with engaging with different think tanks of the member countries, and then at the later phase, maybe we can go for physical events where we can discuss and have this kind of individual framework of each country, and then we can club together into the master plan. Today in 8 to 10 minutes that I have, what I'm going to do is that look at BIMSTEC master plan for transport connectivity from Nepalese perspective. For a landlocked and connectivity deprived Nepal, regional connectivity is crucial for its economic development. And that is the major driver for Nepal to be part of this initiative. Through BIMSTEC, Nepal wants to connect itself to Bay of Bengal region, as well as South and Southeast Asian region through rail, road, sea, and air links. Nepal will also get access to Chittagong and Khulna ports of Bangladesh and Kolkata port of India. It would also get to connect itself with Sri Lanka, Myanmar, and Thailand through land and sea routes. These connectivity projects would not only enhance Nepal's export, but also attract Buddhist pilgrimages from Sri Lanka, Myanmar, Thailand, Laos, and Cambodia towards Nepalese Buddhist religious sites like Lumbini. Nepal can also utilize the BIMSTEC Development Fund to fight poverty. Moreover, BIMSTEC is an ideal platform for providing greater visibility to Nepal in the Indo-Pacific region. Needless to state that BIMSTEC Master Plan for Transport Connectivity will change the overall infrastructure architecture of the region. As said earlier by the speakers, the master plan presents a comprehensive 10-year strategy and action plan for improving the sub-regional transport linkages across Bay of Bengal initiative, BIMSTEC region member states. This is must for regional connectivity, and whole region is going to immensely benefit from it. Dr. Gupta clearly mentioned that South Asia is least integrated region, and the several transnational connectivity projects that existed before during colonial times or before independence of India have disappeared. One such example in Nepal, India is that the disappearance of India-Nepal railway. Both the countries used to have cross-border railway, which gradually disappeared. With BIMSTEC taking in pace with the charter and different working groups, we are hopeful that the master plan would be able to speed up the integration process, and there is a need and desire for deeper connectivity among all the member countries. Since this connectivity project like South Asia links South Asia with Southeast Asia, member countries see huge opportunity through this initiative. However, since the master plan is not a negotiated document, but it was developed and finalized based only on consultations, it is non-binding on member states. We are yet to see how effectively, at what intensity, the member countries are going to adopt and implement this strategy. For Nepal, the strategy of master plan, especially on the road and railway transport, are promising, as the master plan talks about upgrading the key border link roads along BIMSTEC corridor, upgrading or constructing of port access roads if there is concession on the existing roads, and implementation of transport access agreements. The master plan also talks about the development of road along Buddhist and Ramayana circuit, and this is of huge interest of Nepal as it is going to promote Nepal's tourism, because we are all aware that Lumbini, the birthplace of Buddha, lies in Nepal, and Nepal also has several Hindu holy shrines like Pashupatinath, Muktinath, and Janki Mandir of Janakpur Dham, and several others. In fact, master plan talks about connecting these religious sites even through railway links in the region. As far as implementation of transport agreement are concerned, the countries have to resolve some of the technical aspects so that it can be implemented on time. For instance, there was discussion on BBI and motor agreement. Bhutan is not very enthusiastic and Nepal is equally concerned. The reason behind is that the asymmetry in size, economic size, and taxation system of the member countries. For example, the price of Tata Nano cost 1 lakh in India and it cost 5 lakh in Nepal. Now, with this, India will have an advantage and it will discourage Nepali stakeholders. Thus, the countries should come with a mechanism to deal with it. Maybe the countries should create BBI and motor surveys where they can club together, they can put together equal amount of resources and then share the benefits. A least connected Nepal has a huge desire for railway connectivity with India, and India has pledged to assist Nepal with railway network along East-West Highway from Mechi in the east to Mahakali in the west and connect it with Indian grid at 6 different places of Nepal. Nepal is enthusiastic with the BIMSTEC master plan as it talks about prioritization of railway access to ports, especially for the movement of bulk and semi-bulk cargoes, and movement of container traffic between the ports, land borders, and inland clearance or container depots. It clearly mentioned about development of rail links between India and the landlocked member states like Bhutan and Nepal. Nepal do not have direct access to sea as it is a landlocked country, and it relies on ports in its neighborhood, and there is long delay in getting clearance at those ports. So master plan talks about development of new ports and expansion of existing harbor infrastructure to increase the capacity of the region's port to handle growth in container traffic. Similarly, Nepal has interest in inland water transport, development of sustainable, economically viable inland water transport between member states, for example, by providing multimodal and intermodal connectivity in the master plan, which would benefit Nepal immensely. Looking at civil aviation, another sector that is of great concern for Nepal is there in the master's plan explicitly. Investment in cargo infrastructure and equipments at major airports, development of additional infrastructure at the regional's main airport to facilitate the handling of low-cost carrier services, or establishing of seamless multimodal and intermodal transport linkages, development of integrated checkposts for clearance are of greater significance to the region in general and Nepal in particular. I think the most significant in the master plan is the development of border infrastructure at the main BIMSTEC land border crossings. For example, development of integrated checkposts at different locations, upgrading of existing information and communication technologies, and establishment of national single windows and adaptation of several logistics systems. I also like to briefly touch upon what Dr. Datta raised, that Nepal and some of the states in the region, there is more reference of SARC than BIMSTEC. And the reason behind is that they do not have a BIMSTEC experience. I was in Bangkok recently, and there is very little information about BIMSTEC among the people and the policymakers. So while SARC is old, there is some experience engaging with SARC, though not very functional at many fronts. It had created lots of hope. I'm sure the countries will be talking about BIMSTEC and will have greater implications and expectations from BIMSTEC once the plans and policies are reflected on the ground. Though the master plan is exemplary, there are several factors that are going to impact the master plan. First, the political will. There's a need of political will and commitment by the member state, which may be demonstrated by cooperation between and among participating member states, budgeting for identified projects, and including projects in national development plans. Second is there is a need for formulation of appropriate policy and regulatory framework for implementation. Third is development of bankable objects with economic and financial viability to accelerate and implement the infrastructure project on time. There is also need to address the social and environmental concern, and development of human resources and associated capacity is significant. There is also need of partnership with the private sector in infrastructure with the view of budget constraints and the need of other socioeconomic sectors, because engaging them will pace the connectivity projects. Moreover, there is also need of a robust monitoring of the activities of the master plan so that it is implemented on time as planned. I think I'll stop here and take questions if any. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Jaiswal, for those remarks. And I think your point about very little experience of BIMSTEC, that's very valid. And I hope with the adoption of the charter, now they're going to have summits alternate years. That would change this mission. Even we have very little experience of dealing with BIMSTEC, frankly, in India, though India has been a driving force behind it, but very little experience. So I think that needs to change. And it doesn't have to be only at the summit level, but this kind of discussions should also play a role. So I think one thing that perhaps can be done in Nepal, and maybe your institute can take a lead, is to come out with the Nepalese view, your industry view, and other stakeholders in this plan. How do they look at this BIMSTEC plan, and what are their suggestions in terms of priorities and financing and so on that we have just discussed? So now I just Mihir Bhosle, policy analyst, to kindly take the floor.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you, VIF, and thank you, NICE, for inviting me to this panel. I would, my apologies if I reiterate what some of the points which the distinguished panel members have presented, but I have a presentation and I would like to share that. Yes, is it visible, the presentation?
No, sir, it's not visible.
Yeah. One. Yes,
it's visible.
Now it's visible. Yeah. So I was asked to speak on India's transport network and the BIMSTEC master plan for connectivity. So I will attempt to weave the Indian transport network with the BIMSTEC master plan for connectivity and what its implications are. As we know that the India's motive of joining the BIMSTEC connectivity or connectivity with BIMSTEC is to establish this bridge, or what India is looking at is to have this unique linkage with between South and Southeast Asia. So the BIMSTEC provides an opportunity for India to really link these two regions and to benefit from the economic development and the people-to-people linkages between these two regions. It is also the convergence of India's Act East policy and the neighborhood first policy, where India as a good neighbor to maintain good neighborly relations with the subcontinental neighbors, that has been the focus. So the BIMSTEC provides the convergence of India's Act East and the neighborhood first policies. Also, if we look at the BIMSTEC, the Bay of Bengal region, We have the coastal states of the Bay of Bengal, Odisha, West Bengal, Tamil Nadu, Andhra Pradesh, and also connecting this region, the potential of this region and for economic growth, and the northeast region's long lost connectivity with Bay of Bengal has been emphasized under the Bay of Bengal in the BIMSTEC. If we look at India's transport system is the largest physical infrastructure system in the BIMSTEC region. There are around 5.89 million kilometers of road, 67,300 kilometers of rail, and major seaports and international airports in this region. But as we understand that the road transport sector in the country accounts for 87% of the passenger traffic and 60% of the freight movement in the country. So as Dr. Pritam Banerjee has stated, the Gati Shakti plan, the PM's Gati Shakti plan, tries to align the present multimodal mix of India of 60% of road, 31% of rail, and 9% of water to the global benchmarks. The global benchmarks are 25 to 30% of road, rail 50 to 55%, and water 20 to 25%, and promote development of multimodal infrastructure. The projects that India is implementing currently, there is the Bharatmala Pariyojana, which caters to the roads, which talks about linking of increasing the network of highways, increasing the cover of highways, where more and more freight movement can take place through the national highways. Which presently is more spread out, it's more dispersed. So the focus of the Bharatmala Pariyojana is to create 44 economic corridors, which will connect the place of production to the place of consumption. So the whole network of roads are being planned. As we can see that 26,200 kilometers are planned to be connected economically, and then there are corridor routes between these 44 corridors, which are highly developed growth centers. There would be interconnections between them. There would be feeder routes, and there would also be some border connectivity. So this has been envisaged under the Pariyojana of the government. And then we come to the Sagarmala project, the Sagarmala scheme, or the Sagarmala connectivity scheme, which looks at the building and development of ports along the coastline of India, and also as has been envisaged in the Bharatmala, it will look to connect the ports to connectivity from ports by roads, from the production centers to the consumption centers. Then the National Rail Plan for India 2030. This is a vision which the government of India has come up with. It aims to formulate strategies to increase the freight carried by railways to about 45%. So 58 supercritical projects of total length of 3,750 kilometers have been thought about under this scheme, and basically the railways would look at increasing the freight movement and increasing the share of freight movement from what it is present. Then the National Waterways Act of 2016, 111 international waterways have been declared as national waterways. The development work of 13 of the 26 national waterways. National waterways has already been started, and they have been found feasible for cargo and passenger movement. The projects of development which overlap with the BIMSTEC plan include the National Waterway 1, which is on the Ganga and Hooghly River from Haldia right up to Allahabad, and the National Waterway 2, which is the Brahmaputra River, which starts from Sadia in the northeast in Assam to Dhubri, and also the National Waterway 16, which includes the Barak River and the IBP route, International Waterway in the northeastern region. So the National Waterway 16, Barak River, and the IBP route, these might be of somehow overlap, and there exist synergies which could be explored with the BIMSTEC master plan for connectivity. IWI is also planning to run a fixed schedule of running ships, sailing ships between National Waterway 1 and National Waterway 2. So for the first time, the Brahmaputra River will be connected to the Ganga River, and this they are trying to establish services, regular services between them. So this is another plan which coincides or which converges with the BIMSTEC master plan for connectivity. So as has already pointed out by Dr. Datta and others, the prioritization of road development along the key arterial roads has been the focus of BIMSTEC flagship projects, and it also looks at the potential trade corridors. And there is a progression, upgradation of key border roads between the border and national road network. So the BIMSTEC projects look to connect the border regions and have facilitate better connectivity between them. Similarly, in case of railways and rail transport, there is prioritization of rail access to ports, especially for the movement of bulk and semi-bulk cargo, and movement of container traffic as well. And also when it comes to ports, there are BIMSTEC master plan for connectivity talks about the development of new ports and expansion of existing harbor infrastructure. Development of sustainable, economical, and viable inland waterway transport between member states. This is important from the perspective of multimodal connectivity, because inland waterways can really change the skewed mix of multimodal transport within the country. So the BIMSTEC projects rightly talk about the use of inland waterways for development of the region, and also multimodal connectivity, multimodal projects like the Kalagan multimodal transit transport project, which is an important way of which is an important multimodal route, which has already been it's already being implemented between India and Myanmar. And also development of airport facilities, as Dr. Banerjee has rightly pointed out, the development of the Dhaka airport. Due to the congestion in the Dhaka airport, there are more and more freight movement. There is a chance of using the Kolkata port. So this is an important development, and this can be improved. The BIMSTEC plan also talks about making New Delhi the hub for connectivity in the region. New Delhi airport will become the hub, and the rest of the routes will be spread out in the hub and spoke wheel model. And lastly, the BIMSTEC projects also talk about multimodal and intermodal transport linkages. So this has been enough stressed upon by my previous speakers. So these are the 10 proposed multimodal and intermodal transport corridors within the BIMSTEC region, the Kolkata, Benapole, the Benapole, Jessore, Dhaka, Agartala corridor, which uses rail, road modes of transport, and this has also been prioritized under the BBN motor vehicle, and it is likely to be operationalized after December, by early next year. Also, the Kolkata, Chittagong, Agartala corridor, the Agartala, Akhaura, Chattogram port links, and the links from Agartala, Akhaura, Dhaka, and Mongla. Then Mongla, Dhaka, Fulbari, Panitanki, Kakarvita, Kathmandu, Guwahati, Imphal, More, Tamu, Kalewa, Yangon port, and the rest. So we can see that the border checkposts, as my previous speakers have also stated, that the ICPs or the land custom stations have been, and this cross-border connectivity passes through these land custom stations, and it is an important aspect which while the BIMSTEC Master Plan of Connectivity will be implemented in future. So coming to the synergies, there are, as previous speakers have also pointed out, there are synergies between the national schemes, the government of India schemes, and the BIMSTEC Master Plan for Connectivity. For that matter, the Bharatmala Pariyojana talks about corridor-based development of key arterial routes and linking of production centers and consumption centers, and there is focus on international connectivity roads. Around 2,000 kilometers of them are likely to build under the Bharatmala Pariyojana. And to state discuss some of the projects, already the Imphal-More link, which connects India to Myanmar through the National Highway 39 and Asian Highway 1 and 2 has already been completed. It's a fascinating road, and also you would know that the construction of the Feni Bridge at Sabrum in Tripura. Also, there have been at least 6 rail linkages, which India and Bangladesh have been working on jointly for cross-border connectivity and to increase trade. So we can see, as Dr. Gupta had also pointed out, that the pre-partition days, this region used to be the most integrated region. So the snapping of the rail linkages between India and Bangladesh, for that matter, and also in the sub-region, have been one of the consequences of partition. So these routes are being looked into. Talking about the challenges and way forward, there exists a lot of challenges, particularly in the northeastern region. Like, for example, a few months back when I was in Guwahati, there were heavy torrential rains, and due to floods, a lot of these projects, these railway connections and road connections were inundated by water, and due to floods, the connection between Assam, southern Assam from Guwahati, the capital, was broken, and this problem has been a feature of this region. The northeastern region is susceptible to floods and natural calamities, and they need to be featured in any transport plan or regional transport plan. Also, besides there being other barriers which border checkpoints face, there is sometimes excessive security checks. Like, for that matter, cargo and passengers are cargoes are unloaded again and again, twice, thrice in some regions, and again loaded for them to continue across the border. So within the Indian side also, there have been these concerns coming up of excessive security check by the border guard, by the BSF, or maybe Assam Rifles. So this has been a major challenge, which is obstructing the movement of goods and passengers along within the region. And also, my previous speaker spoke about how trade, there needs to be a momentum in trade, which has to come through. For that matter, in Northeast, there are very few products which are traded with Bangladesh. So for that matter, excepting a few products like limestones or boulders, or for that matter, there just exists one cement plant in the whole of the northeastern region. So barring for these production centers or these industries, there are very few industries. So we need to look at these having more industries in the northeastern region, so that the region is well developed and it can produce the goods which can be further exported to the neighboring countries. And lastly, when we talk about the borderlands, we have to factor in the concerns of livelihood of the people living in the borderlands. Dr. Banerjee spoke about the Kolkata-Dhaka link and the border crossing. And there are concerns of livelihood of these people if there is a seamless movement from one checkpost to the other, or one. So what are these checkposts to do in the future? And what are the people who are dependent on, or the livelihoods of the people who are dependent, say, for example, in Bonga, or say, for the example, on the Benapur side. So these need to be factored in. I thank you so much for giving this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bhosle, for that presentation. And I think you outlined some of the major infrastructure construction programs in India, that is Bharatmala, Sagarmala, and the improvement, the improving the share of cargo in freight in railways. That is, I think, a very, very important in inland water. Now, the short point is that India is in a very different stage of development now. Never before has been so much focus on infrastructure development of all kinds. So this India being the largest country in the BIMSTEC, this obviously gives a lot of opportunities for our BIMSTEC members, and they should take advantage of it. So there's sometimes a hesitation which comes about. This, I think, should be done away with, because the Indian economy is now already crossed 3 trillion, will cross 5 trillion in a few years, and is slated to become the third largest economy. Otherwise, PPP terms, it also is. So there is this huge potential for the neighborhood. So that is, I think, that in the discourse, we always keep talking about the past and, all kinds of big brother, this, that, etc. But I think it's important that we should look ahead and see what are the opportunities here. So now I request Professor Meena Vaidya from the National Defense University of Nepal.
Ma'am, please unmute yourself.
Yes. Am I audible now?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Thank you, sir. Namaste. Nice to see you all, Dr. Arvind Gupta, and the fellow speakers and the prominent participants online. Thank you, Nepal Institute of International Cooperation and the Vivekananda International Foundation, the joint organizers, for having me on this dialogue series for BIMSTEC Master Plan on Transport Connectivity. So it's my pleasure to share views on Nepal-India connectivity and how it can be enhanced. And with this regard, many issues have already come up with regard to connectivity. So we know connectivity is one of the basic requirements for the relationship between and among the community of nations. So I would take it as a prerequisite for the development infrastructures and the development from all the sectors in a sustainable way. So this is the connectivity that always promotes collaboration and a partnership. That's why we take it as a key to regional integrations, as it is already stated in BIMSTEC Master Plan, for which the BIMSTEC has stood for. With these objectives, the transport connection was included as an initial area of cooperation when Bay of Bengal Initiative for Multisectoral Technical Economic Cooperation was established some 20 years back. So BIMSTEC, as we know, is not only about the connections between the countries. It connects South Asia to Southeast Asia. So this is how it connects the mountains with oceans, or reinforcing the ecological interdependence. Because of geographical connectivity, as we know, Nepal, India, they can seize, they can grab the opportunities and the potentialities available not only between them, but in the region as a whole, utilizing all the BIMSTEC master plan and the transport connectivities, where I think India leads, being the largest country and the largest transit link to Southeast Asia and Asia. And this is how we, the countries, we can seek to benefit from what the regional organization like BIMSTEC has to offer us. This also promotes, so far we think, the joint ventures in the area of trade, capital investment, the water resources, hydropower, tourism development, and creating wide ranges of opportunities for the livelihoods. These two neighbors, they are well connected by geography, as we know. They are also connected by history and culture, and they have that type of economic interdependence as well. We do have strong religious ties of kinship and culture from time immemorial. Now we have Ramayana circuit, Buddhist circuit, and we do have so many religious sites that have helped boost the spiritual ties. That is some sort of soft power diplomatic relations in course of India-Nepal relationship. Within the years, we have seen some remarkable progress in connectivity projects. Both of the countries, they are showing positive signs of better connectivity on railway lines. One of the recent examples is the operation of Jayanagar-Kurtha, that is 40 kilometers long railway links that is already in operation. And this is the first part of around Jayanagar, Bijlapur to Bardibas. That is 70 kilometers in total. That is the railway link between Nepal and India. And that was constructed under the government of India's grant assistance. In the same way, we are proposing for Raxol and the Kathmandu railway line that is being proposed. And I think we should take all these as landmarks in the series of connectivity. But we should not forget that for the first time, Nepal-India railway line was constructed during the time of Rana Prime Minister Chandra Shamsher. That was from Raxol to Kathmandu, Raxol to Amlekganj. We know India has wide railway links, not only that is not still being connected to its neighboring countries. That is also, Nepal also includes on that she could have developed some decades ago. The process on roadway projects is also taking place, especially in Tarai region. They are also working on waterways. India agrees to allow some Nepal to use inland waterways on Ganga River. We have year links also that was started in early 1950s, and that can be extended with the growing demands. Now, how connectivity can be enhanced? This is another important part of the discourse that I am asked to focus on. Nepal-India relation, when we talk on that, this is purely characterized by open border shares. We do have some 1850 kilometers open border with India that links with 5 Indian states, UP, Uttarakhand, Sikkim, Bengal, West Bengal, and Bihar. No doubt, we know better physical connectivity with lesser barriers. They bring unhindered movement of the people. But unregulated free movement of people across the border, as observed, it has been a problematic from the security viewpoint that has given rise to some illegal activities and unauthorized movements of service and goods. So who are the hardest hit because of that open border system? Of course, the inhabitants residing near the border lines. So we have seen hardly a day goes by without any unpleasant activities like kidnappings, shortages, killings, human trafficking, explosion, and short deaths. So how we focus on border infrastructure is very important in terms of promoting and enhancing connectivity, as it was raised by the previous speakers as well. So we have to focus on border infrastructure and border security, first of all. So when we talk on the relationship between these two nations, it is characterized by unscientific open border that is to some extent unmanaged, and unresolved border disputes, and the unequal provision of 1950 treaties. And these problems, time and again, they surface and hinder the smooth conduct of political and diplomatic relationships. But this master plan presents a very comprehensive 10-year strategy and action plan for the sub-regional transport linkage, covering roads, railway, inland waters, transport, and the airports. It also recommends the strategic plan, master plan also recommends the strategies and actions to enhance transport connectivity between and across the BIMSTEC member states. But this all depends on the honest and time-bound implementations of all the instruments that we have signed. When we talk on implementation side, it always is very weak and feeble. There are always good talks going on, but when it comes into the record of performance, we get the things being done very minimal. The next thing that has already come up from the previous speakers, that the strong mechanisms that regularly monitor, robust monitoring, and address the bottlenecks in connectivity projects and infrastructures is also widely felt necessary. The next thing is commitments from the member states and international development partner. They are more required to make it a more success. We know there is already a huge support from Asian Development Bank that is quite highly commendable, but this project further needs quite a good support from all the donors as well, because we know funding and the finance, that is a greater part for the success of any plannings and the projects. So national states should play a very proactive role in that directions. So we say that it's the time to translate promises into performances, and it's the time to deliver but not just to deliver it. So we need to take more pragmatic and result-oriented measures and mechanisms. We have to come up with new models, strategies, and approaches to make BIMSTEC transport connectivity a reality and pragmatic. So, of course, India has we too have attached great priority to neighborhood first policy, but that should be reflected in action. Differences, we should be assured that differences at the political level, the changes in the governments, they do not affect the entire bilateral relationships. So serious efforts from both sides are quite needed part to restructure, to revisit, and reassess the relationship in a way that reflects the changing realities of regional global politics and the rising geopolitics, and also with the rising public sentiment of the 21st century that is based on equality, that is based on justice, good faith, and the right to self-determinations, human rights, human dignity, and human security. This is how we can promote and strengthen better connectivity in a very sustainable way. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those remarks. I think you talked about spiritual tourism as a driver for this. I think that's a very important point that you have made, and also the need for strengthening border infrastructure, because it is the border security which is extremely important. I think these issues are being discussed in a separate working group in BIMSTEC. There is national security chiefs who are discussing some of the, we cannot ignore security concerns at all. There is, after all, drug trafficking, there is terrorism, there is arms and ammunition, and so on. And even one incident can derail a whole project. So, they're so sensitive about these issues. But I think there has to be a synergy between one pillar of BIMSTEC and the other. One is, of course, connectivity pillar, but also there is a security pillar of BIMSTEC. So I think they should mention some issues which are, I think, purely bilateral about unequal 1950 treaty, etc. I don't want to go into them because this has been discussed a lot. This is already on the political agenda. And the political leadership will take its own time. There has been suggestions or recommendations of the eminent persons group some years ago. So there are many ideas there. If we bring too many of these political issues in the connectivity things, I think the problems, our discussions will become more complex. So right now we are really looking at the technical issues. And then, of course, at the summit level, all these issues, and all these concerns which arise in different areas, they will be harmonized and some decisions will be taken. So thank you very much. We've had a very rich discussion. There was a lot of learning in the discussion, and all the experts made some fantastic presentations. I do hope that Shraddha and Pramod, we could produce some kind of a paper out of this discussion, even a brief paper, because we shouldn't lose the richness of this discussion. I'm not very sure whether at the government level these issues are being discussed in the manner that open and frank manner that we have discussed these here. But certainly some input to the government based on these discussions would be helpful. Now, I'm really very sorry. We are 1:30 almost, and we have exceeded our time, and we will not be able to take any questions. I will only now request General Sahni to wrap it up for us, and then we'll close the session.
Thank you so much. I'm least qualified to speak on this subject because I came as a spectator, but I just want to put across one thing, as very correctly brought out by Dr. Arvind Gupta. This is the time where, after a very long time, India is investing very heavily into the infrastructure. in a very, very big way. And we are, I think, in a position to make sure that the benefit of this infrastructure development also goes across the borders, and the connectivity increases. Because basically, the SARC, which was supposed to be a vehicle, is ceased to remain have any meaningful presence now, and the BIMSTEC has taken it over. And this is the time now, in my view, that we should give less time to the politics and more to the geoeconomics, because we find that it is the geoeconomics which are driving the growth of a country. And wherever there has been a slight failure in that aspect, the results can be very, very terrible, as already we have seen in our neighborhood happening. So I think there is a requirement to pick up threads where they were and put all our efforts to make sure that the connectivity takes place the way it should, because that's what brings prosperity actually. The politics don't bring prosperity. The politics bring too much of deviance, which don't benefit anybody. And this has got to be a joint effort. And we have seen wherever there has been a bilateral effort, it has yielded results. But the bilateral effort alone cannot give you the results. So I think this BIMSTEC is an experiment. BIMSTEC is an area where there is a lot of scope. And I'm afraid all these plans, which look so good on the paper, will not be worth the paper they are being printed on unless we put in efforts from all sides and make them work. So my view is that we should be able to continue working on these and implement them. And of course, there is the funding, which is a big problem. But I also feel that funding itself can also be looked at if the proper effort is made. Padma Bridge, for example, is an example, I think, in Bangladesh, where one never could have imagined that they would manage it from within their resources, and they have. And one bridge has made all the difference. So I think these are the good examples which we should pick up and try and work on that. And BIMSTEC is a very, very fine vehicle to ensure that there is a joint working for a prosperity which goes across the region. And I think we are the least connected region, and that's what it's a bit of a shame that this area, which was actually the subcontinent, the connectivity before the partition of India and Pakistan and Bangladesh, that itself has got to be restored in a big way. And of course, as far as the other countries are concerned, like Nepal, there are areas where we can work, and Thailand, etc. So I think these should be pushed politically otherwise, and think tanks can make a large effort, huge effort in making the political masters aware about the importance of these areas. So thank you so much. I think as director brought out, the presentations were absolutely marvelous. And in my view, all the think tanks in their respective countries of the BIMSTEC should continue urging their government to keep putting more attention on areas of economic infrastructure connections amongst us all, because I feel that if we all pull together, we can reach the areas where we want to reach. Thank you so very much.
Thank you very much. And with that, we close today's session. And once again,